Rhaegar Targaryen stood on the threshold of the great hall, his silver-gold hair shimmering in the pale light of dawn. He could still hear the distant moan of wind as it rattled the tall windows, carrying echoes of war's tumult through the corridors of the Red Keep. Outside, the city stirred with unease. The bells of the Sept had only just ceased their clanging, having tolled relentlessly for days in mourning for those lost during the final clashes between the royal forces and the rebels at the Trident. Yet now, the hush that settled over King's Landing was far from peaceful. It was thick with apprehension. Aerys, the second of his name, had proven himself unfit to rule, unstable in both mind and action, and had unleashed horrors upon his subjects that none could have imagined. Rhaegar's chest tightened at the memory of the wildfire, the screams, and the flickering madness in the eyes of his father. He could still feel the quivering fear that had once paralyzed him before he found the resolve to act, a resolve that now guided his every movement in these final hours of King Aerys to Cida's reign. He pushed open the heavy door, the clang echoing in the nearly empty hall. His footsteps carried him past pillars carved with dragons winding in and out of the stone. Torches spit and hissed in iron sconces, the flames dancing against the gloom. At the head of the hall stood the Iron Throne, a twisted edifice of melted swords and jagged steel. A monument to Targaryen power, forged by the flames of dragons. It loomed like a silent sentinel over all who would dare approach. Tonight, though, a different destiny awaited it. Cersei Lannister hovered at the far side in a swirl of gold and green, her eyes following Rhaegar's approach. She looked uncertain, yet her features carried a mixture of relief and resignation. Already, word of Rhaegar's takeover was traveling swiftly through the keep, and lords and ladies who had once bowed before Aerys were preparing to shift their allegiances. Rhaegar's loyal men, a remnant of what had once been the royal army, guarded every entrance, their hands on the pommels of swords. The hush in the hall was thick, broken only by the crackle of torchlight and the gentle rustle of Cersei's silks. Rhaegar scanned the chamber, half expecting the shape of his father to materialize from some dark corner, screeching curses and threats of wildfire. But his father was imprisoned, locked away, and soon, the entire realm would breathe easier for it. He moved to the base of the throne, the steel swallowing all other presence. Rhaegar felt its shadows loom over him, felt the cold threat of those fused blades. In that moment, he recalled the presence of a different throne, the stone seat in the quiet courtyard of the Tower of Joy, where Lyanna Stark now lay recovering from the birth of a child, the babe that Rhaegar was certain would fulfill ancient prophecy. It was that child, Baby Jon, who represented a new future, not just for House Targaryen but for the entire realm. If only Rhaegar found the courage to sweep away the madness of the old ways and build something better. Ser Barristan Selmy stepped forward out of the torchlit gloom. Clad in white armor, he bowed low, showing no sign of the turmoil he must have felt. Rhaegar's heart warmed at the sight of his most honorable Kingsguard. Ser Barristan was among those who had quietly supported him. "Is it time?" Barristan asked, his voice measured but urgent. Rhaegar nodded. "We will do this as I have planned. Father will remain in his cell, unharmed, unless he forces our hand further. But the realm must know that the Targaryen dynasty is not lost to madness. It continues, reborn. Tonight we crown my son. We crown my son." Barristan's eyes flickered with surprise. He'd known Rhaegar's conviction for some time, had known of the child's significance, yet there was something shocking in hearing the words spoken openly. "Your Grace," was all Barristan said, bowing his head. Rhaegar's gaze lifted to the high vaulted ceiling. He swallowed hard, remembering the oath he'd sworn to himself in the silent hours after the Trident. To be a ruler of mercy, of justice, of peace. If the Targaryen name were to endure, it must be cleansed of the stain of Aerys tyranny. The city was battered, its people fearful. War had shaken the realm. There was no appetite for more devastation, no desire to watch the world burn under a lunatic king. The nobles who had flocked to the rebels would soon realize there was a new presence on the throne. The words would echo, "Rhaegar, the warrior prince, has ascended." But then they would learn more. The true heir, the child, The prophesied one. Rhaegar had spent many nights poring over ancient scrolls in the library at Summerhall, reading all he could about the prince that was promised, about the prince of the dragonflies, about the fires that shaped the Targaryen lineage. Each scrap of knowledge brought him closer to the truth that his own father had long ignored in his mania. A soft clang of armor signaled the arrival of two of his loyalist knights, their eyes alert, scanning the hall for any threat. They parted to let a small retinue enter. The High Septon in his cream and gold vestments, his face ashen with exhaustion and fear. By his side was Maester Pycelle, his chain rattling against his robe. Behind them, a few ladies and lords lingered, uncertain whether to witness or to flee. Rhaegar's heart thrummed, a combination of fear and exhilaration. At last, as if signaled by some unspoken call, the heavy side doors opened. Lyanna Stark entered on unsteady feet, cradling the babe in her arms. Rhaegar's breath caught. She looked pale but resolute, her long brown hair braided with white roses. The sight of her reminded him of the fateful day they had met in the lists at Harrenhal, and how everything had changed. The hush in the hall deepened as Lyanna approached. The baby in her arms stirred, letting out a soft cry that echoed off the walls. Lyanna's gaze remained steady upon Rhaegar as she neared him, and he reached out gently to support her. A hush, like a collective intake of breath, held all the watchers in thrall. Rhaegar placed one hand lightly on the child's swaddled form, feeling the tiny warmth through the fabric. For a moment, all the fear and madness of the past year fell away. "This is Jon," Lyanna whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "Jon Targaryen, and Stark," she added, her face resolute. Rhaegar nodded, swallowing. He had insisted on including her family name in the boy's identity. Somewhere, somehow, blood ties to the north were precious and strong, and Rhaegar was determined that old traditions of Targaryen isolation would not hamper this new beginning. He thought of House Stark, battered by war, torn between loyalties, overshadowed by the vow Lyanna had broken by fleeing with him. This would be his promise to the north, an acknowledgement that the child was shaped by two legacies, by fire and by ice. The High Septon stepped forward, eyes weary, but he nonetheless intoned the ancient words that would cement a royal inheritance. He spoke of the seven, their blessings, and the sanctity of the king's blood. He spoke words that had rung through these halls for centuries, crowning Targaryen after Targaryen. Yet now, these ancient words carried a different weight, for they were crowning not only a new king, but the hope of a new era. Rhaegar held his breath as he stood beside Lyanna, letting the Septon's chanting fill the air. The child cooed softly, squirming as Pycelle stepped up with a small golden circlet. In a normal coronation, the king himself would be crowned, but Rhaegar had insisted that the child be hailed as king, while Rhaegar served as Prince Regent, bridging the gap between the old generation and the new out. Pycelle's hands trembled as he lifted the band of gold, perhaps remembering the once lively boy he had watched grow up. Rhaegar Targaryen, who had so often buried himself in books and song. Now, the maester looked upon the next in line, carrying the weight of prophecy upon him. The circlet touched the baby's brow, a delicate, almost tentative coronation. The wind outside seemed to still. The torches flickered. Lyanna closed her eyes for a moment, and in the hush, Rhaegar spoke the words, voice low. "Behold Jon of House Targaryen, first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the realm." The watchers echoed the final lines. Some whispered in awe, some trembled, uncertain if the realm was stepping out of the fire and into the unknown. The baby's soft breathing seemed magnified 100-fold. Rhaegar's fingers found Lyanna's, giving them a gentle squeeze as if to say, "We stand together now for him, for the realm." For a moment, a hush overcame the entire hall, punctuated by the distant cry of a lone gull outside. The new king fussed at the strange sensation of metal on his brow, and Lyanna carefully lifted the circlet, nestling it beside the swaddling cloth. Only then did Rhaegar allow himself a single moment of triumph. He had done it. He had prevented further slaughter by removing his father from power. He had crowned his son, forging an alliance with House Stark that might heal the rift this war had caused. The weight of centuries of Targaryen tradition felt less stifling now, as though the child's innocent presence dispelled some of the darkness that had clung to the throne. The madness would end here. Yet, as soon as the wave of relief passed, Rhaegar's mind sharpened with the reality of what came next. The Seven Kingdoms were not at peace. The rebellion had gained momentum, and men like Robert Baratheon, Eddard Stark, and Jon Arryn were still out there, having fought with righteous fury against a tyrant. Rhaegar would have to convince them that a different Targaryen now held the reins of power. He would have to show them that they had not risked their lives in vain. Even so, the shifting tides of politics could not be undone with one symbolic act. Reconciliation would require more than a baby's coronation. It would require trust, penance, and humility from a Targaryen who had once taken a Stark maiden away from her betrothed. But for now, Rhaegar breathed in the moment. The Iron Throne seemed less menacing now as he looked at it. The swords did not glimmer with the usual threat, but instead served as a silent reminder of the past violence that had led here. For the sake of his son, for the sake of Lyanna, and for the sake of the Seven Kingdoms, Rhaegar would do what needed to be done, forging alliances and bridging divides. Night had fully descended by the time he led Lyanna back through the corridors. Every guard they passed bowed or dropped to one knee, not for Rhaegar alone but in acknowledgement of the small bundle in Lyanna's arms, King Jon Targaryen. Their reverence was edged with uncertainty. The swirling rumors about the child's parentage had already taken hold, and there was no shortage of superstitions about the union of fire and ice. But Rhaegar noted that no one spat or muttered curses, no one questioned openly. Something about the babe's innocence, perhaps, stayed their tongues, or perhaps the memory of Aerys' brutality made them desperate for any sign of hope. Lyanna glanced at Rhaegar, her gray eyes soft. "We'll need to set the realm at ease," she murmured. "My brother Ned, Robert, all of them." "I know," Rhaegar said, gently pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I will send envoys at once. And I will go myself if I must, to prove to them this is no trick." Lyanna's mouth tightened slightly at the mention of Robert. She had once been promised to him. She knew full well that his fury burned hot as a forge for the Targaryens he blamed for the disappearance of his betrothed and the death of his adoptive father, Jon Arryn's younger brother in the conflict. For the sake of the realm, they would have to find common ground with these men who had once been considered traitors. They reached Lyanna's chamber. Outside, 2 Kingsguard stood vigil, their white cloaks trailing on the stone floor. Upon seeing the child, they bowed their heads, pressing fists to breastplates. Rhaegar led Lyanna inside, where a fire danced in the hearth, casting a gentle glow over the rugs and tapestries. A wide bed with plush pillows awaited, but Lyanna went straight to the cradle, carefully placing Jon inside. For a moment, the tiny infant fussed, mewling as though already longing for the warmth of his mother's arms, but he soon settled. Rhaegar stood beside her, gazing at their child, at the gentle flutter of eyelashes as the babe drifted off. For all the tension, for all the fear and the burdens of the realm, it was this small miracle that anchored Rhaegar's resolve. He placed an arm around Lyanna's waist and whispered, "I promise I will protect him. I will protect you both." She reached for his hand, her eyes bright with both fear and hope. "And who protects you?" Rhaegar managed a soft smile. "The realm itself, if we do right by it." They stayed like that for a while, watching Jon's slow and steady breathing. In the corridor outside, the keep began to stir with renewed activity. Messengers were already racing out to every corner of King's Landing, bearing the news. Kingsguard would soon be dispatched to ensure loyal men held the city gates, that the gold cloaks were under control, that no whisper of treachery threatened the infant king. In the storm of tasks and challenges ahead, this simple moment of peace felt precious. Much later, as the candles burned low, Rhaegar descended a winding staircase to a smaller hall where council meetings were often held. He knew that soon, the lords and ladies of the realm would be summoned to witness the formal dethronement of Aerys. But first, Rhaegar would gather those who had pledged their loyalty. The war had not been won by Targaryen arms alone. There were alliances, pacts made in secret. Some families had turned against Aerys, not necessarily against the Targaryen line. Rhaegar intended to strengthen that fragile unity. When he entered the chamber, he found a handful of men waiting. Sir Barristan, of course, his expression calm, though he could not hide the tension in the set of his jaw. Lord Connington, his ginger hair disheveled, eyes flicking nervously to the door, and several bannermen who had remained faithful to the crown, despite their misgivings about Aerys rule. They rose as Rhaegar entered. He did not seat himself at the head of the table. Instead, he stood at the opposite side, resting his hands on the back of a chair, mindful that every gesture was watched. "Thank you for coming," he began in a measured tone. "Tonight, I crowned my son, Jon, King of the Seven Kingdoms. I did this to ensure that the realm understands. We are turning a new page. My father's madness will no longer cast its shadow over us." Murmurs rippled through the lords. Some looked relieved, others wary. Connington glanced around, uncertain how to respond. At last, he said, "We've heard the bells rung. We heard the news that you led a force back to King's Landing to depose your father. Does the realm know truly what has happened here?" "They will," Rhaegar said. "Soon, ravens will fly to every corner of the kingdoms. Word will spread, from Dorne to the north. We must be prepared for how lords and small folk alike will react. Many believed I'd died on the Trident, and they believed that if I lived, I would carry on my father's madness. But I have no desire to continue his legacy of terror. I want peace. I know that for some, the Targaryen name is stained. It will take time to prove we can offer a better kind of rule." Barristan inclined his head. "Your Grace, what of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark? They led armies against your father. How do we reconcile with them now?" Rhaegar exhaled, heart heavy. "I am sending an urgent invitation to Eddard Stark, requesting his presence so that he may see his sister's child. He has reason to distrust me, but he loves Lyanna more than any slight he might hold against me. As for Robert, I will do what I can to persuade him that this war should end. I will offer him a seat on the new small council, if that will quell his anger. I will recognize his grievances. And if he demands justice, we will talk of justice." "Nah." A hush settled over the men. It was clear to them that Rhaegar had a plan, though whether it would succeed was uncertain. The realm was in uproar. The Highgarden forces had only recently been fended off near the Blackwater. The Riverlands were ravaged. The entire foundation of the crown's power had been shaken. Yet here was Rhaegar Targaryen, speaking calmly of peace, holding on to hope with a child's coronation. It was bold, perhaps mad in its own way. But to many, it was a glimmer of something that might salvage the blood-soaked fields and burned towns. "I will rely on your support," Rhaegar said, eyeing each man in turn. "I cannot rebuild the realm alone, and I know trust must be earned. But if you stand with me, if you help me ensure King's Landing is safe and the city fed, if you help me reach out to our enemies, then we can end this war quickly. We can bring about a time of peace. We can bring about a time of peace." Connington, who had once been a dear friend of Rhaegar, lifted his chin. "You have my sword," he said simply, and others murmured the same. Barristan bowed. "And mine, until my last breath, your grace." Rhaegar thanked them, each in turn, and laid out the initial steps. How the city guard would be restructured, how envoys would be sent to the rebellious lords, how the small folk must be fed and sheltered. In the flickering torchlight, they planned well into the night, penning letters to the major houses, preparing supply wagons for the winter that might soon grip the north, and drafting initial treaties that hinted at alliances. It was a start, just a small spark in the darkness, but a spark that, with care, might grow into a gentle flame of peace. Eventually, the men departed, their eyes ringed with exhaustion, leaving only Rhaegar and Barristan behind. The Kingsguard knight lingered, studying Rhaegar with quiet concern. "Are you certain of this path, your grace? You risk your life and your son's future on the mercy of men who have every reason to hate your family." Rhaegar lifted a hand, rubbing at his temple. "I have to. If I do not extend trust, I will be no better than Aerys, cowering behind walls and punishing every perceived slight with fire." The realm cannot endure more of that. And perhaps if I had taken steps sooner, if I had reined in my father's cruelty, thousands might still be alive. I owe it to all who have perished." Barristan's gaze softened. "I have served your house for many years. I have seen you grow from a boy who loved his harp to a man who understands the weight of a crown. If any can succeed at mending these wounds, it is you." Rhaegar nodded, offering a wan smile. He was grateful for Barristan's loyalty, for that unyielding sense of honor. The knight excused himself, leaving Rhaegar alone at the table, the papers scattered before him. Among them was a letter bearing the seal of House Stark. He ran his thumb over the wolf's sigil, thinking of Lyanna's quiet strength, of Eddard's unwavering honor. So much rested on that family now, on bridging the gap between them and the Targaryens. He prayed the future would prove kinder than the past. Daylight found its way into the city in thin, pale rays, illuminating the aftermath of war. Although King's Landing had been spared a sack by the Lannisters or the rebels, thanks to Rhaegar's swift action, signs of violence still remained. Broken cobblestones, abandoned barricades, and the stench of fear hung in the streets. Merchants peered out of shuttered windows, uncertain if new chaos would descend. Beggars crouched in alleyways, waiting for the first sign of a new tyrant or a promise of relief. But on this particular morning, as Rhaegar emerged from the Red Keep, flanked by a small retinue of guards in Targaryen crimson, the crowd that gathered was subdued, not hostile. He had donned simpler attire than the usual gold and red regalia. His hair, a regal silver gold, hung neatly past his shoulders. The hush in the courtyard was such that even the seagulls seemed reluctant to cry out. People craned their necks as he approached, some with hope, others with distrust. Rhaegar paused, letting his gaze travel across the small folk. They had borne the brunt of Aerys's madness, had feared wildfire, and witnessed random executions. At his signal, a herald stepped forward, unrolling a scroll. The hush tightened like a drumskin, the tension palpable. The herald's voice rang out, firm but measured. "Know that by decree of Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince Regent, and by the will of the High Septon, the reign of King Aerys II is ended. Jon Targaryen, first of his name, is now King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Prince Rhaegar pledges to bring peace and prosperity to King's Landing and all the Seven Kingdoms." A collective exhalation rustled through the crowd. A few voices shouted questions, but the guard's presence kept order. The herald continued, listing specific points. New measures to feed the hungry, an immediate halt to forced conscription, an invitation for displaced families to find shelter in the city's safe wards. Rhaegar watched the faces, seeking some flicker of trust. In some, he thought he caught it, a weary acceptance that perhaps, just perhaps, this Targaryen was not like his father. When the herald finished, Rhaegar lifted a hand. "You have my word," he called out, "that I will not repeat the horrors of my father's reign. I ask only that you grant me the chance to prove it." "Nanini." An uneasy murmur rippled. At length, an old man in the front of the crowd, leaning heavily on a staff, lifted his grizzled chin. "And what of them that were killed, them that were burned?" he asked, voice trembling with anger. "Words won't bring them back." Rhaegar looked upon him, not with scorn, but with sorrow. "No, they will not," he said softly. "I cannot undo what has been done. I can only ensure no more burnings, no more cruelty. I beg for your patience while we mend what was broken." "And no." The old man's eyes glistened with tears he would not shed in public. He said nothing more, but he did not spit at Rhaegar's feet either. That, in its way, was a small sign of acceptance. As the crowd dispersed, curiosity replaced dread for many. Some whispered that they'd heard the new baby king had half a wolf's blood, that he was a winter dragon, that he was the one the red priests had whispered of in the east. Rumors, as always, spun in 1,000 directions, but at least they were not immediate calls for rebellion. Inside the Red Keep, the newborn king's presence became a hush of awe wherever he was carried. Wet nurses and maids tiptoed around, as though the slightest sound might disturb him. Lyanna, though still recovering, insisted on keeping Jon close, feeling uneasy in a place where, not so long ago, her father and brother had met gruesome ends. The memory of that tragedy was never far from her mind. She kept her hand near Jon's cradle as if to assure herself that, for now, he was safe. Rhaegar joined her, carrying rolled parchments and sealing wax. He sat in a chair by the window where sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes. Lyanna watched him with quiet curiosity. "You're sending letters," she observed. "More appeals for peace." "Yes," he said. "To all the lords paramount, the Stark letter is the most important. I must reach Eddard before he does something rash or embarks on another campaign. I want him to know he's welcome, that you are well, and that his nephew sits on the throne." She nodded, lips tight. "He'll come. Ned is honorable. He'll want to see me, want to see the child. As for Robert..." She paused, frowning. "He may not be so easily swayed. You took me from him and his mind. He's lost so many friends to this war. He blames you." Rhaegar's expression was pained. "I know. But I must try. If Robert cannot accept peace, then we face another confrontation. But for the realm's sake, I hope it does not come to that." He pressed the Targaryen seal into warm wax on the parchment, imprinting the three-headed dragon. For a time, they shared the silence of the chamber, interrupted only by the baby's soft coos. Rhaegar drank in the domestic sound, so new to him, so fraught with meaning. Once, he had been a lonely prince, misunderstood by many at court, devoting himself to prophecies and harps, always feeling the weight of destiny on his shoulders. Now he was a father, and though the weight was heavier, it felt more purposeful. In the days that followed, King's Landing came to life with uncertain vigor. Street vendors resumed their calls, fishmongers by the harbor shouted prices, children chased each other through alleys while gold cloaks watched with wary eyes. The Red Keep bustled with the sudden arrival of minor lords and petitioners, each eager to secure their place under this new Targaryen regime. Rhaegar faced them all, sometimes with Barristan at his side, other times with Connington or Pycelle, always maintaining a steady calm. He signed orders to distribute grain from royal reserves to the poorest districts. He commissioned the rebuilding of certain areas that had been burned or damaged. He quietly released a handful of political prisoners who had been rotting under Aerys' paranoid orders. Each gesture sent ripples through the city, signaling that a new wind was blowing from the Red Keep. At night, though, Rhaegar found little rest. He would lie awake listening to the distant hush of the city, the faint horn calls that drifted from the port, the occasional clang of armor in the corridors. Some nights he would rise and pace the length of his chamber, a quiet swirl of swirling thoughts. The baby in the adjoining room would stir now and then, and Lyanna would hush him back to sleep. Every time Rhaegar heard that small cry, he was reminded of the responsibilities riding on his shoulders. He could not help but recall the glint in his father's eyes the day he realized that Rhaegar might move against him. Aerys had screeched that the city would burn, that traitors would die screaming. Even confined as he was, the Mad King still posed a threat. There were those in the keep who feared what would happen if he ever escaped, or if some fanatical loyalists attempted to free him. Aerys' darkness hung over the Red Keep like a dragon's shadow, haunting every corridor. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Rhaegar found himself standing outside the locked chamber where Aerys was kept. 2 guards, men he trusted, flanked the door. The corridor smelled faintly of must and stale fear. Rhaegar's lips were set in a grim line as he motioned for the guards to let him enter. They obeyed, and he stepped inside the dimly lit space. Aerys sat on a small tattered stool, his once luxurious silver hair now tangled and matted. His fingernails were broken, and his skin appeared sallow in the lantern light. But the eyes, those violet eyes that had once commanded fear, still held a hint of that old frenzy. He looked up as Rhaegar entered, lips twisting in a sneer. "So you've come to gloat, have you?" Aerys spat. "The traitor prince, or should I call you regent? My own son turning against me like a faithless dog." Rhaegar stood a few feet away, arms folded, staring down at the man who had once occupied the greatest seat of power in the realm. He said nothing for a moment, letting Aerys' tirade hang in the stale air. Then, quietly, "You have your life still, father, because I do not wish to spill more Targaryen blood." But the city is mine now. The throne belongs to my son." Aerys' face contorted with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Your son, a bastard whelp, born of your adultery, and that Stark witch's venomous womb. You think that child will save you? He's cursed by the old gods and the new. I am the dragon. I am the king, and I will see you all burn." Rhaegar exhaled, struggling to maintain composure. "You will not leave these rooms," he said, each word carefully measured. "You will be treated fairly, given what you need. But you will never again command men to burn innocents." Aerys laughed then, a mirthless cackle that sent a shiver down Rhaegar's spine. "Oh, you weak, sentimental fool. You do not understand. Fire is the only truth. Fire cleanses, fire purges. You think you can keep me locked away, but the dragon's flame." Rhaegar turned and rapped on the door. He had heard enough. The guards opened it. As he stepped out, the echo of Aerys's mad laughter followed him like a malignant spirit. He swallowed, running a hand over his face. A single encounter with his father was enough to remind him how precarious their situation was. There would always be the threat of those who still feared the Mad King's cunning. But Rhaegar steeled himself. Aerys was a relic of the past. The present and future belonged to Jon, to the new alliances Rhaegar meant to forge. Quietly, he made his way back to his own chambers. Passing tapestries and alcoves that once had seemed imposing, now he was the one forging a new path in those corridors, one he hoped would never again be darkened by such madness. On the morrow, one of his envoys returned from the Riverlands. The man, dusty and haggard, brought news. Eddard Stark was indeed returning to Winterfell to see to urgent matters, having parted ways with Robert Baratheon, whose thirst for vengeance had not yet abated. Rhaegar listened intently as the envoy described how half the realm was in an uneasy lull, uncertain whether to accept the new Targaryen or to continue the fight for Robert's cause. Yet, Ned Stark was open to parley. That was enough to give Rhaegar hope. Lyanna received the news with a trembling relief. "Ned will come," she said. "He might gather some men for his own safety, but he will not strike unless threatened. If we make it clear that we will welcome him and his retinue with honor, he'll respond in kind." Rhaegar nodded. "Yes, let him bring as many men as he feels he needs. And once he sees the child, once he sees you are unharmed, I believe he will lay down his sword." Lyanna smiled softly, resting a hand on the cradle's edge. Jon's tiny fists flailed in the air, as if in silent encouragement. "I've prayed for this moment," Lyanna murmured. "To see my family again, after so much bloodshed." Rhaegar placed a hand over hers. "It will be as you wish. And with the North at peace, Robert will find his supporters dwindling. Perhaps he can be reasoned with." A faint shadow crossed Lyanna's features. She knew Robert's temperament all too well. Wild and impassioned. He believed he had loved her deeply, though she herself had seen a different side to him. A side of roaring boasts, of a hunger for battle and triumph. Whether that was truly love or simply lust for conquest in all forms, she could not say. But she pitied him, for the heartbreak he believed he had suffered, and the many friends he had lost in the war. A week passed, and with each day, King's Landing settled a little further under the regency of Rhaegar Targaryen. The distribution of grain continued. The city watch patrolled for brigands, and the rumor of a baby king, half ice and half fire, spread far and wide. Diplomats from Dorne arrived, curious to see if the Targaryen prince who had once been betrothed to Elia Martell would truly keep his word about forging new alliances. Rhaegar greeted them courteously, expressing remorse for Elia's heartbreak and offering fresh ties of mutual benefit. The Martells left with measured words of acceptance, though the wound of seeing Rhaegar with another was still raw for some of them. Nevertheless, the seeds of reconciliation were planted. One evening, after the bustle of audiences and councils had ended, Rhaegar took up his silver-stringed harp. He stole away to a quiet courtyard in the keep, a place where lilac and winter roses grew in carefully tended beds. Moonlight silvered the flagstones. A hush embraced the darkness, as he ran his fingers over the strings, coaxing a gentle melody. It was a lullaby, half forgotten, that he had once played for his mother before she passed. He let the notes drift, weaving longing and hope into every chord. Lyanna found him there, her footsteps soft. She wore a plain gown of gray that reminded him of her Stark heritage. She paused under the archway, listening to the music. When he finally let the last note fade, she moved closer, kneeling beside him on a stone bench. For a moment, neither spoke. The fountain trickled, the moon hung low, and the sweet scent of roses enveloped them. "Beautiful," she whispered, placing a hand on the harp's frame. Rhaegar smiled, though there was a sadness in his eyes. "I used to believe music was the highest form of truth, that in it lay the secrets of the soul. But now I see it's the quiet moments with our son, the steps I take to try and heal a kingdom. That is the highest truth I can aspire to." She tilted her head, studying him. "You still carry guilt. I can see it. For the war, for the deaths." He sighed, nodding. "I do. Perhaps I always will. So many are gone. My father's cruelty should have been checked sooner. But I was a coward. I wanted to believe I could fix everything without directly challenging him. I wanted to believe the realm would right itself if I found the child of prophecy. Perhaps that was naive. Nadir." Lyanna touched his cheek. "We cannot change the past. We can only do better now. Jon is proof of that. He is our chance to rewrite what was broken." Rhaegar kissed her palm in silent agreement. They stayed there a while, letting the night drape over them like a tender cloak. And for that moment, the burdens of war and the swirling chaos outside the Red Keep's walls seemed a distant echo. On the morrow, ravens arrived bearing grave news. Robert Baratheon had seized Storm's End, which had been under threat from loyalist forces, and was fortifying it with the help of the might of House Baratheon's bannermen. He refused to recognize the legitimacy of the baby king. Word spread that he marched under a new banner, one that depicted a crownless stag piercing a dragon. He was calling himself Stormlord and King in open defiance, though no formal coronation had taken place on his side. But the gesture was enough to spark fear of another full-scale war. Rhaegar reviewed the missives with a heavy heart. If Robert continued to gather troops, the realm would see more bloodshed. The new King Targaryen was an infant, after all. Soldiers might not fear a babe, no matter his lineage. Yet Rhaegar pressed on with diplomatic efforts, urging House Tyrell and other great houses to remain neutral or to side with the rightful king. He prepared men for a possible confrontation, but he made it clear he wanted to avoid open battle, if at all possible. A fortnight passed, and at last, word reached Rhaegar that Eddard Stark was making his way south with a retinue of trusted men. The approach would be cautious, and Rhaegar prepared a formal welcome, ensuring that no hostilities would greet Ned at the city gates. When the day arrived, Rhaegar and Lyanna stood on the high ramparts of the Red Keep, gazing out at the winding road. Mid-afternoon light cast a golden sheen on the battlements. Eventually, a small column of riders appeared, their banners snapping in the breeze. The dire wolf of House Stark stood proudly against gray and white. A hush fell among the watchers as Eddard Stark led his men through the city gates, flanked by anxious onlookers. Some recognized him as a rebel who had fought the Targaryens. Others saw him as the bride's brother, perhaps a sign of peace. At the courtyard, Rhaegar waited with a cluster of red and gold-clad guards, ensuring every gesture signaled respect, not aggression. Ned dismounted, pulling off his gauntlets. He was lean, with a solemn face, dark hair salted with the grief of war. His eyes flicked across Rhaegar, but his face was unreadable. Then his gaze settled on Lyanna, and his stern countenance cracked with relief and heartbreak. She rushed forward to him, her hair streaming behind, and they embraced tightly. Courtyard hushed at the sight. Lyanna's eyes filled with tears, and Ned pressed a hand to her cheek, as if to confirm she was truly alive and well. "You're here," Lyanna whispered. "Oh, Ned, He shook his head gently. "There is time for all that later," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank the gods you are safe." Behind them, Rhaegar approached slowly. He bowed his head in a gesture of respect. "Lord Stark," he said, "thank you for coming. I am glad to receive you in peace." Ned's expression turned guarded. "I have come to see my sister," he said, "and to see the child you claim is the rightful king." Lyanna's face set in quiet determination. "Come inside," she said. "Let us show you your nephew." They led Ned through the corridors. His men waited in a receiving room, under the watchful eyes of Targaryen guards. Eventually, Ned was brought to Lyanna's chamber. The hush of the place, the gentle atmosphere, seemed to surprise him. He expected a lavish show of Targaryen pride, perhaps. Instead, he found a simple bedchamber, with minimal finery, warmed by a small hearth, and there, in a cradle of polished wood, lay Jon. Ned stood still, his breath catching. Lyanna knelt by the cradle, lifting the baby gently, and held him out for Ned to see. Rhaegar hovered behind her, his presence calm but tense. "Jon," Lyanna whispered, turning the baby so Ned could see his tiny features. The child stirred, bright eyes blinking. "Jon Targaryen, your nephew, blood of Stark and Targaryen both." Ned gazed at the infant with something akin to awe, though there was also a flicker of pain. He glanced over at Rhaegar. "My lady sister named him Jon. After our father, perhaps, or—" Lyanna looked down, nodding. "Partly for father, partly for Jon Arryn, and to honor the memory of those who fought for what was right. He is not just a Targaryen, Ned. He is a Stark, too." "Disnol." Ned carefully extended a hand, gently brushing the baby's cheek. Jon reached out with a tiny fist, grasping Ned's finger. For a moment, the only sound was the child's soft gurgle. Something shifted in Ned's face, and Rhaegar saw the cold tension begin to melt. Lyanna looked to Rhaegar. He inclined his head, letting her speak. She turned back to Ned. "I cannot make you forget what happened or how I left. But I was not abducted. I went willingly. I love him, Ned, and I love our son. I know the realm has suffered, and for that, I carry guilt. But please understand that we had to do this. We had to prevent my father's cruelty from continuing." Nendere. Ned's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Rhaegar thought he would object. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "I have seen too much death, Lya. If this child truly heralds peace, if Rhaegar truly intends to break with the past, then I will not stand in the way of that. But what of Robert? He hunts Targaryens and those loyal to them. He believes you were taken from him." Rhaegar stepped forward, voice calm. "I will attempt to reason with him. I offer him a place at court, recognition of his noble deeds against my father. But I cannot surrender the throne. My son is the rightful king, and I will not see him murdered." "Now—" Ned's gaze flicked from Rhaegar to the baby again, as though weighing the realm's fate in that tiny face. "Robert won't be easily swayed," he said. "He has lost too much, hates too deeply." Lyanna cradled Jon closer to her chest. "Will you help us, Ned? Will you counsel him, try to calm his rage?" Ned hesitated. Then he nodded, albeit reluctantly. "I owe it to this realm, to the memory of those who have fallen. I will speak with Robert, though I can promise nothing of his reaction." "No?" Rhaegar felt a wave of relief. "That is all I ask," he said softly. Ned lingered a moment more, then carefully, awkwardly, he reached out. Lyanna placed Jon into Ned's arms. The Lord of Winterfell, solemn, weighed by duty, looked down at the baby as though he held the world's most fragile treasure. Lyanna watched with tears in her eyes, and Rhaegar stood quietly, letting the significance of that moment unfold. Eddard Stark had come, and in his arms was a symbol of reconciliation if the realm would permit it. From that day, Ned remained in the Red Keep for a while, speaking with Rhaegar privately, learning how the city had changed since Aerys' downfall. He met with lords who had once despised the rebellion, men who now realized that Rhaegar intended a different path than his father's. Slowly, grudgingly, Ned acknowledged that King's Landing was not soaked in dragonfire and cruelty as before. He observed the improvements, listened to the petitions, and though he did not once break his stern demeanor, The flicker of acceptance began to show. He even took a meal with Rhaegar and Lyanna, an uncomfortable but necessary step toward bridging that gap. Meanwhile, messages continued to flow regarding Robert Baratheon's growing forces at Storm's End. He had begun mustering men from the Stormlands, urging them to rally behind him in a final push to free the realm from Targaryen rule. Rhaegar worried that despite his best efforts, bloodshed was on the horizon. Yet Eddard Stark, after receiving a letter from Robert, insisted on traveling to Storm's End to speak with him directly. Rhaegar granted him safe passage and an escort, an act of goodwill that Ned accepted with a curt nod. Before leaving, Ned visited Lyanna once more, standing by the cradle as Jon slept. "He looks so small," Ned murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "And yet so much rests on him." Lyanna nodded, stroking the baby's wispy silver-brown hair. "He is our future, Ned." Ned looked at her, then at Rhaegar, who stood by the window. "For his sake, and for the sake of the realm, I will do all I can to stop Robert from continuing this war." He hesitated, brow furrowed. "If Robert does not yield, your choice may be stark. Defend your son or lose him. I pray it doesn't come to that." Rhaegar dipped his head. "Else do I." With that, Eddard Stark took his leave. The Red Keep gates closed behind him and his escort, disappearing into the swirling dust of the King's Landing roads. Rhaegar was left to contemplate how the next chapter of this slow and perilous dance would unfold. He returned to Lyanna's side, watching Jon's steady breathing. Each day, the child grew stronger. His eyes, a curious mix of gray and violet, took in the world with unknowing wonder. Rhaegar's resolve strengthened whenever he gazed upon him. Fire and ice, Targaryen and Stark, bound together in the forging of a new age, if it could survive the storms to come. Outside, the Red Keep bustled with activity. Courtiers gossiped about the Child King, about the Northern Lord's cautious acceptance, and about the looming specter of Robert's wrath. But for now, within the hush of that private chamber, Rhaegar and Lyanna found a moment of peace, the lull before the next test of steel and hearts that awaited them. And in the cradle beside them, Jon slept on, oblivious to the heavy weight of the crown he wore, a crown that might either unite the realm or plunge it back into chaos. Their story was only just beginning. Days passed in a hush of expectation, each sunrise carrying new rumors and hopes through the corridors of the Red Keep. Rhaegar could sense the tension like a high harp string stretched to its limit, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Yet the city did not fall into panic. Perhaps it was the distribution of bread in the poorest districts, or perhaps it was the memory of Aerys' wildfire that made even the most discontented dwellers reluctant to stir trouble. Whatever the reason, the capital held its collective breath as Eddard Stark rode south to Storm's End to parley with Robert Baratheon. Lyanna spent much of her time tending to Jon, who grew more alert with each passing day. The baby's tiny fingers curled around the edges of blankets, or reached for the bright sunlight streaming through the windows. Sometimes, Rhaegar would place a slender stringed instrument by the cradle and pluck a gentle tune, watching as Jon's eyes flickered with that vague fascination only newborns possess. Lyanna's smile, though often shadowed by worry, would then grow gentler, and she would tuck a lock of dark hair behind her ear, listening to the quiet lullaby that Rhaegar coaxed forth. In these moments, they felt almost like a family, unburdened by crowns and swords. The only reminders of the world outside were the steady footsteps of Kingsguard in the hall, and the letters that arrived daily from distant lords. One such letter arrived from Dorne. Rhaegar summoned Maester Pycelle to read its contents in a private audience, not wishing to alarm Lyanna with fresh tidings of any potential hostility. The missive was penned by Prince Doran Martell himself, couched in the flowery courtesy favored in Sunspear. He congratulated Rhaegar on the new king and acknowledged the end of Aerys' rule, but behind the politeness lay an undercurrent of watchful caution. House Martell had once pinned great hopes on Princess Elia's marriage to Rhaegar. Now, Rhaegar's union with Lyanna Stark had altered those alliances. Still, Doran Martell did not close the door on reconciliation. He hinted that as long as the peace held and certain recompenses were made, Dorne might yet support the child on the throne. Rhaegar set down the letter with a thoughtful frown. He could almost hear the measured tone in Doran's voice, the dryness that masked keen intelligence. With Elias' heartbreak and Aerys' monstrous reign both fresh wounds, Doran's loyalty was not guaranteed. He could not ignore such a powerful corner of the realm. Yet he also knew that making amends would require delicate negotiations that could not simply be left to letters. The time would come, perhaps soon, when he would have to look Doran in the eye and assure him that the new Targaryen reign would honor the bonds once formed with House Martell. The corridors of the Red Keep were quieter than they had been in the days of Aerys' madness, when screams or wild laughter might echo at odd hours. Now, the hush was one of tension, not chaos. Servants passed one another with murmured greetings. Guards in Targaryen Crimson kept watch at strategic points. If occasionally they spotted suspicious figures or heard rumors of plots, they acted discreetly, not wishing to plunge the city back into the terror that had so recently abated. Rhaegar recognized the need to root out the last loyalists of the Mad King, yet he refused to simply round them up and execute them. Trials would be held if need be, to show that justice could exist without cruelty. One morning, as the sun illuminated the city in a bright wash of early light, Rhaegar received word that a small delegation from the Vale had arrived. They included a nephew of Jon Arryn, though not the man himself. Jon Arryn was said to be nursing injuries in the Eyrie after a skirmish in the war's final days. It was rumored he was wavering in his support for Robert Baratheon. Perhaps he had begun to recognize that Robert's thirst for Targaryen blood might not lead to the stable peace the Vale so desired. Rhaegar had them shown into a modest audience hall. He sat upon a carved wooden chair rather than the Iron Throne itself, striving to convey that he did not cling to the symbols of raw power in the same way his father had. The delegates entered with cautious eyes and bowed politely. Their leader, a lean man named Servardus Egan, offered the customary courtesies and expressed condolences for the trials the crown had suffered. Rhaegar listened patiently, then spoke in a level voice. "I am grateful you came. The Vale has long been a pillar of stability in the realm. I hope we can find common ground in this uncertain time. I do not wish for more bloodshed." Mirwan. Servardus inclined his head. "His lordship, Jon Arryn, asked that we observe conditions here and return with a clear account of your regency. He is aware of the rumors that your father remains imprisoned and that the child king is but a babe. There are some who fear the realm may still be consumed by conflict." Rhaegar pressed his hands together. "I understand the concern. King Jon is but an infant, yet we have already begun rebuilding. The city is at peace. The lords are sending envoys to parley rather than armies to besiege our walls. I ask only that Lord Arryn consider these facts before making any final decision regarding an alliance with Robert Baratheon." "No." Servardus studied him for a moment. "Will you permit us to wander the city freely, to speak with the people without hindrance?" "Of course," Rhaegar said. "I want you to see what the capital truly is, not an illusion shaped by fear. I will instruct the gold cloaks to offer you safe passage wherever you wish to go." That answer seemed to please them. They bowed and withdrew, leaving Rhaegar to hope that what they saw in the streets would support his cause. A city exhausted by war but not broken, trying to rise from the ashes of tyranny. He sat there for a while, pondering the precarious balance he was attempting to maintain. Already, the demands of the regency weighed on him like an invisible chain around his neck. He had known it would be difficult. He just had not realized how many delicate negotiations he would need to handle at once, all while trying to keep the fragile peace from shattering at a single blow. That evening, after the day's council had ended, Rhaegar walked the ramparts of the Red Keep, accompanied by Sir Barristan Selmy. Below, the rooftops of King's Landing glowed in the dying light. In the distance, the Blackwater Bay shimmered a deep purple, reflecting the sky's final streaks of sunset. The hush of the hour was broken only by the distant cry of a gull and the rhythmic pounding of waves against the stony shore. Barristan walked in measured steps, silent until Rhaegar broke the hush. "You've stood beside me since the madness began, Sir Barristan. You've seen the city's darkest hours. Do you think we can truly heal these wounds?" Barristan rested a hand on the hilt of his sword, his weathered face thoughtful. "Your Grace, I have faith that justice, coupled with mercy, can do much good. Yet I cannot deny the challenge you face. Robert Baratheon commands a fierce loyalty among those who followed him. Many blame the Targaryen name for the death of Lord Rickard Stark and his son, Brandon, and they remember how thousands died at the Trident. You must prove that you are not your father." "Man." Rhaegar leaned his hands on the stone battlement, gazing at the shimmering horizon. "I wish I had acted sooner," he murmured. "But regrets are for the past. We must move forward now." Barristan gave a curt nod. "I stand ready, Your Grace, to do what must be done." They paused there, letting the wind brush past like a wordless acknowledgement of time's unrelenting pace. In the gloom that spread across the city as twilight deepened, Rhaegar imagined each street and alley, each family behind shuttered windows, each hope or fear that his reign might bring. An unspoken vow thrummed in his chest. He would not fail them. The next day brought a small piece of good news. The Vale envoys, after wandering the streets and conversing with townsfolk, reported that conditions in King's Landing were calmer than they had expected. They praised the cleanliness of certain wards and the relative safety compared to the last days of Aerys's tyranny, though they refrained from any outright commitment on behalf of Lord Arryn. They admitted that there was promise in a Targaryen regency tempered by Stark influence. Rhaegar thanked them warmly, hoping that their observations would encourage Jon Arryn to keep the peace rather than ride to war again. Yet for every step forward, there was a new reminder of trouble ahead. Late in the afternoon, a raven arrived from the Reach. It bore a terse dispatch. "Highgarden acknowledges King Jon Targaryen, but remains uncertain whether the child's regent will honor the old pacts. We request a royal visit to discuss matters of alliance and trade. Signed, Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden." The tone was cordial, but the demand for a personal visit was a heavy one. It meant Rhaegar might have to leave King's Landing for some time, traveling through lands still unsettled by war, all for a parley with a lord who might well be hedging his bets. Rhaegar found himself torn. Was it wiser to remain in the capital to oversee the transition, or should he risk the journey to cement a vital alliance? That night, he discussed it with Lyanna in the privacy of her chambers. Jon lay asleep, tiny breaths rising and falling beneath the embroidered blanket. Lyanna was standing by the window, the curtains stirred by a cool breeze from Blackwater Bay. She wore a look of thoughtful concern. "Mace Tyrell is not a foolish man," she murmured. "He loves shows of fealty and grandeur. He might simply want to gauge your sincerity in person, but traveling could be dangerous." Rhaegar stepped closer to her, quiet. "I do have loyalist forces still patrolling the roads, but the realm is far from stable. And what if Robert's men attempt to intercept me on the way?" Lyanna's brow furrowed. "Then it would be a provocation for war, or worse. You could be captured, and if you fall, who remains to protect Jon from those who would claim the throne or end his life?" Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a slow breath. "I cannot hide in the Red Keep forever. If I am to show the lords of the realm that I am sincere in building alliances, I must at times travel, meet them face to face, prove I am not cowering behind the Iron Throne. Yet I also know I must be cautious. Perhaps I can send a trusted envoy first, to ascertain Mace Tyrell's true intentions. If the negotiations go well, I can follow." "Nah, Dale." Lyanna reached out, taking his hand. "I fear for you. For all of us. But I know you must do what you think is right. Send an envoy, yes. Perhaps someone whose name commands respect." "Sir Barristan or Lord Connington." "Someone who can speak with the authority of the crown." Rhaegar nodded. "Barristan, perhaps. Connington's temper can be a liability. Barristan is measured, and Lord Tyrell may respect a famed knight of the Kingsguard." "Man." Lyanna gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Then do it. Show them you are not ignoring their call, but do not plunge yourself into needless peril." Rhaegar brushed a soft kiss on her temple. "You're as wise as you are strong, my lady. I'll arrange it tomorrow." Lyanna looked at him, eyes glistening with both worry and hope. The two of them lingered there for a time side by side, gazing at the child who wore a crown he could not yet comprehend. Morning light painted the Red Keep's towers a gleaming gold as Rhaegar summoned Sir Barristan to a private audience. The white-cloaked knight arrived promptly, a slight bow of the head showing both respect and curiosity. Rhaegar offered him a seat and then explained the letter from Highgarden. "I need you to ride south and treat with Mace Tyrell in my name," Rhaegar said. "Assure him that the crown sees the Tyrells as valued friends. Tell him we will negotiate trade concessions, perhaps even arrange a tourney to commemorate the crowning of King Jon, and to foster goodwill. Anything that might help seal an alliance without bloodshed." Barristan listened intently, then inclined his head in acceptance. "Of course, Your Grace. I will speak honestly of the changes in King's Landing, of your intentions for peace. Perhaps they will see we have turned from the old ways." Rhaegar's face grew solemn. "Yes. And if you sense treachery, do not linger. Return at once. Your life is worth more than any attempt to appease Mace Tyrell." Sir Barristan placed a hand on his breastplate. "I will be vigilant, and I will do my utmost to prevent further war." With that, the knight departed, gathering a small retinue of loyal men to accompany him. Rhaegar watched from the castle ramparts as Barristan and his party filed through the gates, setting out on the road that wound along the Blackwater. He felt a pang of anxiety at sending away one of his most stalwart protectors, but he consoled himself with the knowledge that Barristan's honor was as renowned as his prowess. If any knight could sway the Lord of Highgarden, it was him. Days turned into a slow, tense rhythm within the Red Keep. Reports trickled back about Robert Baratheon's activities. He was forging new alliances in the Stormlands, but the numbers of his supporters were not as great as they once were. Many lords, weary of warfare, waited to see which way the wind would blow. Eddard Stark's presence at Storm's End was confirmed, though no one knew for certain whether his words were cooling Robert's fury or fanning the flames. In the midst of it all, the baby King Jon continued to grow in small but steady ways, gripping people's fingers with surprising strength, managing half-formed sounds that made Lyanna laugh with delight. Rhaegar often felt a strange surge of emotion at those times: love for his son, hope for the realm, and an unrelenting fear that the child's innocence stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat politics swirling around him. It was as if Jon was a beacon of pure light, surrounded by a storm that could snuff it out at any moment. One evening, Rhaegar visited the dungeons where Aerys was still confined. He had avoided the place since their last confrontation, but fresh intelligence hinted that some of the old king's loyalists were attempting to bribe guards, hoping to facilitate an escape. Rhaegar knew he had to check on his father personally, to ensure the wardens remained trustworthy. He descended the narrow steps into the gloom, each torch casting a flickering orange glow on the damp stone walls. The smell of must and stale air pressed in like a tangible force. Two guards snapped to attention when Rhaegar approached the final cell. They fumbled with keys, unlocking the door for him. Inside, the chamber was as dim and cramped as before. Aerys sat huddled on a small cot, looking thinner, his hair tangled around a gaunt face. His eyes, though still reminiscent of Targaryen violet, seemed to flicker with a hollow, haunted quality. He squinted at the sudden intrusion of torchlight. "Come to gloat again, have you?" Aerys rasped, his voice weaker than Rhaegar remembered. Rhaegar stood just inside the threshold, holding the torch high. "I come to ensure you are alive and unharmed," he said, forcing a calm tone, "and to remind you that you will remain here until you face judgment." Aerys scoffed, a wet, rattling sound. "Judgment? From my own son? How the gods must laugh." The torch crackled, sending sparks drifting to the cold stones. Rhaegar studied the man who had once been the king of the Seven Kingdoms, a figure as dreadful as any nightmare, now reduced to a caged wraith. He remembered the day he led the charge into the Red Keep, determined to stop the wildfire from being unleashed on the city. If he had been moments later, half of King's Landing might have been reduced to ash. Even so, the memory of that confrontation still haunted him. The father's shrieking curses, the tang of smoke, the heavy press of inevitability as Rhaegar realized that filicide was the only alternative to letting the city burn. Yet he had spared his father's life, not wishing to stain his reign with the same madness. Looking at Aerys now, he wondered if that had been the kinder choice, or simply a crueler form of torment. Aerys turned his face away, coughing. Rhaegar stepped back to the door, signaling the guards to lock it once more. He had nothing more to say to the Mad King, only a lingering sadness at how far a once promising man had fallen. He climbed the stairs again, his heart heavy, reminding himself that this was another piece of the price he paid for the throne. There was no going back. Outside, the night sky stretched in velvety darkness, studded with stars. A mild wind caressed the ramparts as Rhaegar returned to his own chambers. He found Lyanna there, humming softly, while rocking Jon in her arms. She looked up, her expression shifting from tenderness to concern when she saw the tired lines on his face. "I went to see my father," he admitted, voice subdued. Lyanna's lips parted in sympathy. "How is he?" "Diminished," Rhaegar replied, yet still full of bile. "I only went to ensure no guard had been swayed by bribery. There are whispers of attempts to free him." Lyanna cradled Jon closer, unconsciously shielding him from the very idea. "He is still dangerous, even like that. The memory of his rule will not fade easily." Rhaegar sat beside her, gazing at Jon. The child's eyelids were drooping, but he stirred enough to let out a small whimper, reaching a hand up toward his father's hair. Rhaegar allowed the tiny fingers to latch onto a strand of silver gold. That simple contact soothed the tension in his chest. "I will do all I can to keep him contained," Rhaegar said quietly. "One day, we may hold a formal trial, but not until the realm is stable. Too many might see it as an excuse to start another bloody conflict." Lyanna nodded, placing Jon gently in his cradle. They shared a silent moment, their shoulders brushing, hearts heavy with all that lay ahead. A week slid by in slow drips of rumor and waiting. The sense of stasis broke abruptly, one crisp morning when a rider thundered through the city gates, demanding audience with the Prince Regent. Rhaegar received him in the courtyard, flanked by a handful of guards. The rider, covered in dust and sweat, slid from his horse and dropped to one knee. He thrust a leather pouch forward, panting, "My lord, news from Storm's End. Word from Lord Eddard Stark." Rhaegar's chest tightened. He seized the pouch, opening it to reveal a hastily folded letter. The seal of House Stark was pressed into red wax. With a glance at the anxious rider, Rhaegar broke the seal and scanned the contents. His eyes moved quickly, a frown forming. When he finished, he looked up. "You have done well to bring this so swiftly," he told the messenger. "Rest yourself and see the maester for any injuries." The rider bowed again, stumbling toward the keep's entrance. Rhaegar rubbed the parchment between his fingers. In terse language, Eddard Stark conveyed that Robert Baratheon refused all entreaties to negotiate with the Targaryen regency. His grief and anger ran too deep. He claimed that no child of Rhaegar's would live as king while he drew breath. Yet Ned urged Rhaegar to stand fast and not march out to meet Robert's threat. He believed that many in the Stormlands might desert Robert once they realized the realm did not unite behind him. Rhaegar reread the words, a swirl of conflicting emotions burning in his gut. Lyanna had approached, drawn by the commotion, and placed a hand on his arm. "What does it say?" she asked, voice taut. He handed her the letter, letting her read Ned's measured account. Her lips thinned with worry, and her eyes flicked up to his. "Robert will not be swayed." "So it appears." Rhaegar's tone was grim. "But Ned also counsels patience. He says there may be lords loyal to House Baratheon who have no wish to continue a war. If I march on Storm's End, I might provoke them into defending Robert. If I wait, Robert may find himself isolated." Lyanna's grip on the letter tightened slightly. "Do we have time to wait? Each day we sit idle. Robert gathers more men, if not from the Stormlands, then from mercenary companies. He might seek gold from House Lannister. Tywin Lannister aided you in taking King's Landing, but that was more for his own benefit than love for the Targaryens." Rhaegar frowned. "True. Tywin might be swayed by the highest bidder, Yet if I know Tywin, he despises backing a losing cause. The moment Robert fails to gain traction, Tywin will not risk a prolonged conflict. Our best path might indeed be patience. She gazed at him, uncertain. I don't want to see more bloodshed, but I also fear that waiting will only embolden Robert. He's reckless, Rhaegar. You know his fury. At the Trident He silenced her gently with a hand on her shoulder. I know. But the cost of riding south in force would be terrible. We must heed Ned's advice. If lords begin deserting Robert, we may avert another great battle. Let us trust that time and reason will wear down his resolve. Lyanna closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. Very well. But let us remain vigilant. With that agreed, Rhaegar turned his attention to rallying the city's defenses. The gold cloaks were trained more rigorously, the gates fortified, and supply lines organized so that King's Landing could withstand a siege if Robert struck suddenly. Yet publicly, Rhaegar did not declare a mobilization. Instead, he continued distributing aid to the city's poor, passing new edicts that limited corruption in the crown's bureaucracy, hoping to demonstrate a just reign. Maester Pycelle occasionally ventured that perhaps they should hold a grand coronation ceremony for Jon, something lavish that would awe the lords into acceptance. Rhaegar always refused. The child had already been crowned in a private ceremony that placed him firmly on the throne. Another spectacle might be seen as vanity, or worse, provoke Robert further. Pycelle bowed each time, acquiescing. But Rhaegar could sense the old man's frustration. In the Game of Thrones, appearances mattered. Yet Rhaegar believed it was not banners and trumpets that would keep the peace. It was the earnest desire of the realm to avoid more horror. Meanwhile, a welcome sight appeared on the horizon one late afternoon. Sir Barristan Selmy's column returning from the Reach. Rhaegar was in the Great Hall when a page announced the knight's arrival. He hurried to greet Barristan, whose dusty armor testified to a hard ride. Barristan gave a formal bow, then delivered his report in concise, measured tones. Mace Tyrell is cautious, Barristan said. He fears committing to one side lest he choose poorly. However, I believe he leans toward recognizing Jon Targaryen if certain assurances are given, chief among them that the Tyrells will not be displaced from their positions of influence. He wants Highgarden to host a grand tourney in the new king's honor, and he wants you, your grace, to attend personally if the realm settles enough for safe travel. Dad. Rhaegar listened carefully, a faint smile tugging at his lips. So Mace Tyrell remains consistent in his love of tourneys and pageantry. That's not unexpected. Did he seem open to a formal alliance? Barristan inclined his head. I believe so. He wants stability, trade, and prestige. If Robert Baratheon continues to posture about taking the throne, Lord Tyrell will not openly support him unless Robert can prove a swift victory. I suspect Mace sees that as unlikely. Rhaegar's heart lifted a fraction. Thank you, Sir Barristan. You have done well. Rest now. We will discuss details on the morrow. Barristan bowed again, departing for his quarters, and Rhaegar found Lyanna a short while later to share the news. She listened with cautious optimism. So the Reach may soon fall in line, she asked. Quite possibly, Rhaegar replied. If Mace Tyrell formally pledges support for Jon, then Robert will be even more isolated. The Riverlands too might be swayed by that decision. War might still be avoided. Lyanna let out a slow breath. I pray that it is so. Still, the days ahead brought no certain resolution. Letters continued to crisscross the realm, and tensions remained high. Lords in the Westerlands, loyal to Tywin Lannister, sent ambiguous messages that they supported the Child King only so long as their interests were met. To the north, Ned Stark had returned to Winterfell briefly, ensuring the safety of his own people, and reporting that he remained determined to bring an end to hostilities. In the east, the Vale watched from its lofty perch, waiting for a sign that the war was truly over. Dorne too lingered in a half-pledge, uncertain how to forgive the Targaryens' past transgressions. Everywhere, it seemed the realm was tangled in a web of suspicion and hope. Winter's chill began to creep in. The days grew shorter, the nights sharper with biting winds that cut across the Blackwater. In the Red Keep, servants began lighting more braziers, and courtiers wore thicker cloaks. Rhaegar found himself standing by a window overlooking the city one late afternoon, the sky a smear of steel gray. He was trying to focus on a letter from the Citadel regarding the next year's harvest predictions when a page rushed in, pale-faced, stammering that a visitor of great importance had arrived at the gates. Rhaegar set the parchment aside. "Who is it?" he demanded, stepping away from the window. "Lord Tywin Lannister, my prince," the page breathed, awe and fear mingling in his tone. "He arrived with a sizable escort. He seeks an audience with you at once." The mention of Tywin Lannister sent a jolt of memory through Rhaegar. Memories of the day the Lannister forces had entered King's Landing near the war's end, supposedly to show fealty, only to sack parts of the city. Yet, ironically, it was that same turn of events that had allowed Rhaegar to seize control of the Red Keep before Aerys could unleash wildfire. Tywin was cunning, dangerous, and always a step ahead in the game of power. This unannounced arrival boded either a significant threat or a critical opportunity. Rhaegar hurried down to the throne room, gathering a few trusted knights along the way. He entered to find Tywin Lannister standing with regal composure at the foot of the Iron Throne. He wore a cloak of crimson cloth trimmed with gold, and even in his advanced years, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes cool and calculating. Behind him stood a retinue of Lannister men, their breastplates gleaming like the eyes of lions in the torchlight. Rhaegar did not seat himself on the Iron Throne. Instead, he descended a few steps and stood on equal footing. He inclined his head politely. "Lord Tywin, you honor us with your presence." Tywin's voice was as measured as ever. "Prince Rhaegar, or should I say Prince Regent, I have come to pay my respects to the child king. My house still holds the memory of your father's disregard for alliances, but we recognize that you have taken a different path." Rhaegar managed a small smile. "I am pleased to hear that. Indeed, King John's reign signals a new beginning for the realm." Tywin's gaze flicked around the throne room, noting the presence of guards and the absence of the Mad King. "I must admit, I am curious to see if you can truly unite the Seven Kingdoms behind a babe. Robert Baratheon is not giving up, I hear." Rhaegar studied Tywin's face, seeking clues behind that impenetrable mask. "He is not. But I have faith his cause will falter. War-weary lords will not flock to him if they believe we offer stability." Tywin spread his hands, a gesture of feigned concession. "Stability is, after all, what the realm needs. That is why I come with an offer. House Lannister stands ready to pledge its full support to the Child King and your regency, under certain terms, of course." "Nuts." Rhaegar tensed slightly. "And what terms might those be?" A wry smile ghosted across Tywin's lips. "Marriage alliances, trade privileges, recognition of certain titles, the usual. I propose a betrothal between my youngest son, Tyrion, and the Child Queen. If ever there is one. Or perhaps we might arrange something else in time. My main concern is ensuring that House Lannister is properly rewarded for its critical support in the realm's transition." Mepisens. Rhaegar considered this. He knew Tywin well enough to see that the man wanted to secure power for the next generation of Lannisters. Yet a betrothal to a Child Queen implied the expectation that Jon, once grown, might wed a Lannister, or that Jon's future sister, if Rhaegar and Lyanna had a daughter, might be given to a Lannister scion. It was all distant, uncertain talk. But in the realm of politics, betrothals were often forged before babes could even walk. "I hear your offer," Rhaegar said carefully. "But perhaps we should discuss the matter more discreetly over dinner. I would not commit to any marriage alliances without consulting others." He thought of Lyanna, of how she might react to the idea of wedding their future daughter, if they had one, to a Lannister for political gain. The notion made him uneasy, but he recognized the practical necessity of forging alliances with the West. Tywin inclined his head, a slight glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "As you wish, my prince. I am at your service." "None." They spoke more at length in private, with only a few trusted advisors present. Tywin laid out a series of demands: gold from certain crown lands, commercial freedoms in Lannisport, and potential betrothals that would tie the lion to the dragon. In return, he offered the full might of the Westerlands to defend King's Landing against any threat, including Robert Baratheon's ambitions. Rhaegar negotiated with calm composure, avoiding immediate promises while showing enough openness to keep Tywin interested. By the end of the meeting, they had not signed anything binding, but the general atmosphere was hopeful. Tywin departed to temporary quarters in the keep, leaving Rhaegar to reflect on how quickly the fate of the realm hinged on the stroke of a quill or a single promise made in a torchlit room. When Lyanna heard of Tywin's proposals, she went quiet. Rhaegar saw a flicker of turmoil in her eyes. She recalled all too well the sacking of King's Landing by Lannister forces. How many innocents suffered? "They want to tie our child to theirs?" she asked, her voice laced with tension. "Or any future child, for that matter?" Rhaegar nodded, feeling the weight of it. "It is the way of lords, to bind families together through marriage. But I have not agreed to anything yet. I merely listened." She looked out the window, arms crossed as though to ward off a chill. "I understand the necessity, but after everything that has happened it feels uneasy. House Lannister is ruthless, Rhaegar. I know. Tywin is not a man to be taken lightly, but if forging a tie with him secures peace, then we must consider it." Lyanna turned back to him, her gaze softening. "Peace. Yes. If only it did not require such bargains." "Men." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I will not force any union upon Jon. If in the future we have a daughter, we shall see how the realm stands. For now, I only need Tywin's support long enough to thwart Robert's attempts at war." She nodded, leaning her head against his chest. In the cradle, Jon stirred, letting out a half-hearted cry that quickly subsided. Perhaps he sensed the tension, the swirl of adult voices shaping his destiny while he was still too small to lift his own head. Rhaegar brushed a gentle hand over his son's hair, feeling an ache in his heart at the complexity of the world Jon had been born into. Night fell. The towers of the Red Keep disappeared into shadow, and the flicker of torches lined the walkways. In the distance, the moonlight shimmered on the waters of Blackwater Bay. Rhaegar dined with Tywin in cautious civility, exchanging pleasantries about the realm's prospects. Though the older man betrayed little emotion, Rhaegar sensed that Tywin's ambitions were truly engaged. A secure alliance with the Targaryen regency could elevate the Lannisters to a position of paramount influence. Conversely, Rhaegar needed the stability that Tywin's armies and wealth could provide. It was a precarious dance. In the following days, Tywin prowled the court with predatory grace, meeting lords and ladies who happened to be in King's Landing. He dropped sly compliments about the new order, the renewed Targaryen monarchy, his tone implying that he foresaw great prosperity ahead, if one chose the winning side. Rhaegar did not try to muzzle him. Better to let Tywin do what he did best, sense which way the winds of power blew and align his house accordingly. Yet each passing day also brought fresh reminders that the realm was not yet pacified. Whispers came of bandits roaming the Crown lands, possibly acting under instructions from some hidden faction. Rumors circulated of more Targaryen loyalists plotting to free Aerys from his cell, while others swore that Robert was massing men near the Stormland's borders, preparing for a final strike. And still, no word arrived from Ned Stark, leaving Rhaegar to wonder if Robert had turned him away or if Eddard was embroiled in the Stormlord's planning. One morning, while Rhaegar pored over a map of the Crownlands with Lord Connington, a tremor of excitement swept through the Red Keep. Bells began to ring, not in alarm, but in a summoning call. A messenger hurried in to declare that a large force approached the city. Rhaegar and Connington exchanged glances, then made their way to the walls. There, in the distance, was a column of riders and foot soldiers bearing a banner of golden roses on a green field. The Tyrells had come. Rhaegar's heart pounded. Had Mace Tyrell decided to bring an army to King's Landing without warning? Was it a threat or a demonstration of loyalty? He ordered the gold cloaks to hold position but not to engage unless provoked. Then he descended to the courtyard, prepared to meet whomever Mace had sent to represent him. If Mace did not come in person, the gates creaked open. Sunlight flooded the space, revealing row upon row of Tyrell soldiers in gleaming half-plate, followed by riders in the heraldic surcoats of the Reach. At their head rode Mace Tyrell himself, a stout man with a proud bearing, clad in armor chased with gold filigree. To his left was a tall, slender figure with a graceful posture, wearing a cloak of pale yellow. Rhaegar's eyes narrowed slightly. That had to be Margaery Tyrell, Mace's beloved daughter, known already in some circles for her beauty and charm. And behind them, striding with measured confidence, was the formidable figure of Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, her sharp gaze scanning the Red Keep's courtyard with a critical eye. Mace slid off his horse. Servants rushed to hold the bridles. He extended his arms wide, a broad smile on his face. "Prince Rhaegar, we come to show our allegiance to King Jon. Long may he reign." The sight was impressive. Hundreds of disciplined men of the Reach, arms at rest. Rhaegar stepped forward, forcing a welcoming smile as his gaze quickly swept the ranks, searching for any sign of subterfuge. "Lord Tyrell, you honor us with such a grand retinue. Welcome to King's Landing." Mace bowed with exaggerated flourish. "I wished to demonstrate my earnestness. The Tyrells do not give their loyalty by halves. Prince Rhaegar." Rhaegar nodded slowly, noting the presence of Tywin Lannister on the far side of the courtyard, watching with hooded eyes. This sudden arrival might be a delicate dance indeed, with both Lannister and Tyrell seeking to secure advantage. "I bid you and your household to join me in the Red Keep. We shall feast tonight in honor of your arrival." Mace gestured behind him. "I have brought my daughter and my mother, the Lady Olenna, who is quite eager to see how the capital fares under a new Targaryen monarchy." Rhaegar inclined his head. "They are most welcome." Olenna guided her horse forward, her expression more wary than Mace's exuberant grin. "We have come a long way, Prince, and we expect more than empty words of peace." Rhaegar returned her unblinking stare. "You shall have them, my lady, if I have any power to grant them. I do not seek more war." "No, Neswani," she sniffed, turning to look at the throngs of courtiers gathering in curiosity. "So you say. Let us hope it is so." And with that, the Tyrell party entered the gates fully, their horses and soldiers proceeding in orderly ranks, while the city's inhabitants looked on with a mix of awe and anxiety. The momentous swirl of high lords gathering in King's Landing gave the capital a sense of a grand turning point. Either the realm was on the cusp of peace, or the smallest misstep might ignite a new blaze of conflict. Rhaegar escorted Mace Tyrell, Margaery and Olenna through the halls, offering polite conversation as they passed tapestries depicting dragons in flight and Targaryen victories of old. Rhaegar avoided referencing his father, focusing instead on how the child king would usher in a new era of cooperation among the great houses. Mace nodded along eagerly, while Olenna occasionally made pointed remarks about the practicality of certain alliances. Margaery walked gracefully beside her father, offering a polite smile each time Rhaegar's gaze flicked her way. In the great hall, guards stood at attention, and the Iron Throne loomed at the far end, draped in the golden light of afternoon that filtered through tall windows. Mace Tyrell stared at it with open fascination, while Olenna regarded it with a sort of sardonic amusement. Rhaegar led them to an adjoining chamber, less imposing, where they could speak with fewer ears listening. Mace wasted little time. "We have heard of Robert Baratheon's defiance, Prince. The Stormlands are bold, but if the Tyrells and the Lannisters both stand with King Jon, Robert's hopes will shrivel like a rose in winter, yes?" "Nantro." Rhaegar studied him carefully. "Indeed, it would be so. But only if all parties remain united, and only if we do not provoke the common folk into further rebellion." Margaery's voice was soft yet assured. "The small folk do not want war. They want stability, food, and peace. My father believes that a grand demonstration of unity might quell any remaining thoughts of rebellion." Rhaegar inclined his head. "And by that, you mean a tourney, perhaps?" Mace's eyes lit up. "Precisely, my prince. A great tourney in King's Landing to celebrate the crowning of King Jon. Houses from all corners of the realm would attend, forging new bonds. It would be a splendid occasion, a sign that the realm is healing." Olenna gave a short laugh. and the Tyrells do so love their tourneys. But do not let it blind you, Prince Rhaegar. A grand affair can draw out all sorts of serpents from the grass. Mace shot his mother a reproachful look, then turned to Rhaegar. What say you, my prince? Will you consider such a gathering? Nimbo. Rhaegar hesitated, envisioning the complexities. Lords from across the realm descending on the city, Robert Baratheon perhaps seeing it as a direct insult, potential for conspiracies in every corner. Yet he also saw the potential. If many houses attended, it could serve as a major show of support for Jon. A statement that the realm recognized his claim. He inhaled slowly. I will consider it. A carefully planned tourney could indeed show that we stand for peace, not war. But we must ensure security measures are beyond reproach. Nah. Splendid, Mace said, clapping his hands. We shall discuss details. The Tyrell men have already constructed an excellent plan for the lists and the feasts. With your leave, we might commence preparations as soon as possible. Rhaegar gave a measured nod. Very well. We will talk more. For now, let us see to your comfort. Tonight we dine together and you shall meet King Jon and my lady Lyanna. The mention of Lyanna, a Stark, made Marjorie's eyes flicker with interest. Olenna merely folded her hands. Yes. I'm quite curious to see this Stark princess who caught your fancy, Prince, and the child who might yet shape the future of Westeros. Rhaegar offered a polite smile, though inwardly he braced himself for the swirl of courtly intrigue that would come from having both Lannister and Tyrell contingents within the keep. But if this was the path to peace, he would tread it carefully. By dusk, the keep bustled with preparations for the feast. Servants carried in casks of arbor gold, bushels of fresh produce, and trays of spiced meats. Musicians tuned lutes and fiddles in an antechamber, preparing to fill the night with merry tunes. The presence of so many influential guests lent a fevered anticipation to the halls. Some whispered that a new alliance would be announced that very night. Others spoke of the possibility of betrothals. Lyanna remained in her chambers, helping a wet nurse with Jon. She had chosen a gown of rich gray silk, embroidered with faint red thread. A subtle nod to both Stark and Targaryen colors. When Rhaegar entered, he found her studying their infant, who seemed transfixed by the soft torchlight. She looked up at Rhaegar with a ghost of a smile. Shall I bring him to the feast? Rhaegar hesitated. I believe they will all wish to see him, as he is the king in name. But the hall may be noisy, crowded. If you think it unwise, we can have them come to us afterward. Lyanna glanced at Jon, then sighed. He's been restless today. Perhaps it's best we don't subject him to the noise for too long. I can bring him in briefly so they may pay homage, then take him back. I would rather not pass him from person to person, like a trophy. No. Rhaegar nodded, relieved that Lyanna had the same reservations he did. Yes, that is wise. I do not wish to make a spectacle of him. Let them see, for a moment, the child whose claim unites us all. Then we can remove him from the chaos. She rose, brushing a hand over her gown, and Rhaegar offered his arm. Together they made their way to the feasting hall, guards trailing in their wake. The hall was ablaze with torchlight. Long tables groaned under the weight of platters, and the air buzzed with conversation as courtiers, knights, and lords mingled. Tywin Lannister stood off to one side, engaged in a low-voiced discussion with Mace Tyrell. Olenna sat in a high-backed chair near them, a slight smirk on her face as she observed the interplay. Marguerite Tyrell drifted through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings. When Rhaegar and Lyanna entered, a hush fell. All eyes turned toward them, and toward the babe in Lyanna's arms. Lyanna drew her shoulders back, meeting their gaze with quiet dignity. Rhaegar guided her to the head of the central table, nodding for the herald to announce them. The herald's voice rang out, echoing across the hall. Behold Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince Regent of the Seven Kingdoms, and Lyanna Stark, consort to His Grace King Jon Targaryen, first of his name. There was a ripple of polite applause, though some watchers simply stared in fascination. Lyanna lifted Jon slightly so that those nearest could see. The child blinked in the glow of many torches, letting out a soft sound of protest. A few lords muttered exclamations of how small he was. How strange to see a king no larger than a loaf of bread. But none dared scoff openly. Whatever their private doubts, the lords of the realm recognized that Rhaegar's presence and the threat of Targaryen dragons in living memory was no laughing matter. Mace Tyrell stepped forward with a sweeping bow. "My prince, my lady, it does my heart good to see the realm's future before my very eyes." Tywin approached more cautiously, offering a slight bow of the head. "The child seems healthy. May the gods grant him wisdom." "Dem Dawal." Olenna peered closer. Lips pursed. "Quite a somber-looking babe. Perhaps he's already weighed down by the foolishness of all these grown men." A few laughs rippled through the hall, though some were uncertain. Rhaegar forced a small grin. "He will have enough burdens soon enough, my lady. For now let him remain a child." Lyanna's hand cradled Jon's head protectively. She nodded to the assembled lords, then inclined her head to Rhaegar. "I will let the feast continue without disturbing him further, if you'll permit me." Rhaegar pressed a gentle kiss to Jon's brow, then released Lyanna's arm. "Of course. Rest well." With that, she departed, a pair of handmaids and 2 guards trailing after her. Conversations resumed, albeit in hushed, excited tones. Rhaegar took his seat at the high table. Mace Tyrell to one side, Tywin Lannister to the other. Servants bustled about, pouring wine, bringing courses of roast fowl, venison pies, fresh bread, and sweet pastries. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and the hall once again filled with a din of voices and clinking cups. Rhaegar found himself enmeshed in the swirl of courtly pleasantries, forced to respond to Mace Tyrell's ideas for the tourney, Tywin's queries about the next steps for dealing with Robert, and the sly commentary of various lesser lords who wanted favor or position. Occasionally, he caught Olenna's piercing gaze from across the table, as though she were assessing his every word. It was a challenge to maintain an appearance of assured confidence, especially when so much was still uncertain. After several rounds of food and drink, Mace rose from his seat, raising a goblet high. The hall gradually quieted as heads turned toward him. He smiled benevolently, his cheeks flushed with wine. "Lords and ladies, let us toast this new beginning. To King Jon Targaryen, and to Prince Rhaegar and Lady Lyanna, who promise us an era of peace and prosperity. May the Seven smile upon their reign." The response was a chorus of raised cups and general cheers, though Rhaegar noted some less enthusiastic than others. Still, the mood in the hall soared on the waves of music and wine, as if the gathering dared to believe that war had truly ended and a bright dawn awaited. Rhaegar sipped his wine, forcing himself to savor the moment of unity, even if it was fragile and fleeting. Later that night, when the crowd began to thin and the music lost some of its vigor, Rhaegar slipped away. His mind buzzed with the talk of alliances, the prospects of a tourney, the subtle maneuverings of Tywin, and the watchful slyness of Olenna. He yearned for a quiet moment, and the sound of Jon's gentle breathing. He found Lyanna in her chambers, sitting by the fire with Jon dozing in her lap. "Dono Dei." She looked up as he entered, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. He took a seat beside her, letting the warmth of the flames ease the tension in his muscles. "How was the feast?" she asked softly, voice hushed so as not to wake Jon. He exhaled, draining but necessary. "The Tyrells and Lannisters are circling each other, each hoping to secure favor. They both claim to support us. Perhaps it's genuine, so long as it benefits them." She nodded, her gaze drifting down to the baby. "Will we have peace, Rhaegar?" He studied her face, remembering the fierce spark that had drawn him to her, that passion for life that defied all constraints. "We must. If we do not, everything we've done will be for nothing." "Benter Tamara." She reached out her free hand, and he took it, feeling the faint tremor of her unspoken worries. Jon stirred in her lap, and she hushed him softly. Rhaegar stroked the child's cheek, marveling at how someone so small could hold the hopes of an entire kingdom. They remained there, the quiet crackle of fire their only companion. Outside, the night shrouded the world in possibility. Both the possibility of a realm healed by common purpose, and the ever-looming threat that any misstep could reignite old hatreds. Rhaegar silently prayed that the alliances forming in King's Landing would hold, that Robert Baratheon's fury would be tempered, and that he could spare his son the horrors he himself had witnessed. In that moment of stillness, amid the hush of flickering embers, Rhaegar Targaryen allowed himself to hope that the realm would finally awaken from its nightmares and step into a dawn of peace. But even as he clung to that hope, he felt the weight of unseen forces coiling in the shadows, waiting to strike if the chance presented itself. Yet for now, with his family close, he let the moment envelop him, anchoring him to a dream of a tomorrow free from the ghosts of the past.